It's hot out here, and it's not because of the lights, I guarantee you that. It's so nice to be here. My gratitude and thanks to those who made this trip possible for me to come down from the cool climes of Salt Lake City, where it's only about 92, 93 degrees. Oh my heavens. What a joy and delight to meet you, to meet new friends, and to get acquainted. It's a great cause we're involved in, trying to change a way of thinking, and that's really tough. Sometimes I'm asked what was it like to grow up in the home of W. Cleon Skousen and Jewel, my mom. And I would reply, you mean when Dad was home? What was it like? Lots of traveling he did. Well, he told me a story one time that, as you know, some of you who know of him, he was a scholar of the Old Testament, the Scriptures, and he loved to draw those ancient examples and bring those into modern times. And he told me a story one time that he said, this is a lot like this great freedom cause, this freedom fight or defense that we're in the middle of. He said, ancient Israel. Uh-oh, here comes an Old Testament story. Ancient Israel, when Joshua led them into the promised land, they had been wandering, as you know, before Moses died, all through the wilderness, it says, for 40 years, but they built themselves a tabernacle. And in that was the Ark of the Covenant. And the people were to bring their offerings, remember their peace offerings and sin offerings and forgiveness and trespass and all these different offerings. Well, look how the Lord set it up, Dad said to me. He said, look how the Lord set it up. There were 12 tribes, and one of them, the tribe of Levi, was in charge of that tabernacle. All the other tribes had their inheritance, which when they got into the promised land was territory, coastal territory, wooded territory, grazing land. They all received what they needed as an inheritance, but not Levi. Levi was in charge of the tabernacle. They did not get a piece of land in the promised land. Well, how do you survive? There's several 100,000 people in each tribe by the time they started to get large and really grow and prosper. Well, here's the tribe of Levi. They were dependent upon the rest, the other 11 tribes, to bring in sacrifices. So they would cut the animal in certain divisions and parts, and they had to burn some parts and put bloods on the horns of the altar, and then other parts they would cook to a nice, savory, delicious. And then the giver might receive some, depending, but the tribe of Levi received that as their food. That's how they survived. So look at this brilliant connection. You have 11 tribes, all living their lives, being prosperous, trying to do what's right, raise their families, flocks, herds, crops, you name it. And this one tribe totally dependent on them sustaining with those sacrifices to God. Now, as Israel became more corrupt and they started to forget God, guess what they did? They stopped bringing in sacrifices. So as the 11 tribes stopped sending sacrifices, what does Levi do? Starve to death? Well, if they didn't do something, yeah, they would starve to death. And so they had to leave their tabernacle, temple labors and go out and start raising crops and raising animals, fending for themselves. And so that connection to God died. And my dad said to me, can you see it, son? There's a few people who are here, like the tribe of Levi, with that connection to truth and to light and to knowledge and to God. And if the rest of us don't support them, they have to let go too. So I kind of think tonight that's what we are here tonight. We're like the tribe of Levi. We're just struggling to stay alive and keep that connection. And And the other people, as their interest wanes away, it gets harder, doesn't it? But that doesn't lift the burden off our shoulders to do our best and to keep trying and to stay faithful and not go down as Israel did. The tribes divided, the 10 from the 2, and then finally they were conquered and carried away. Great story. Dad would tell these stories. It wasn't like we'd sit around the table and say, "Let children pull out Leviticus. We're going to discuss chapter 7 tonight." No, you didn't do that. But if we had a question, he was very, very happy to answer that. So I thought of that story tonight, seeing how we're all working together for the right, important cause. And we need to support and sustain those who are actively moving forward with $1, $10, anything that we can come along with. Now, up in Salt Lake, that's where I live. We're just about finished raising our family up there. Kathy and I have 10 children. They're all boys, except for 6 girls. And we just have 1 daughter left to get married, and then we're done. A lot of grandchildren. We're up to 30. We just had a couple of twins born a few months ago, so that brought us to 29 and 30. Beautiful, wonderful blessing of a family. Now, right now, I'm a teacher at Utah Valley University in Salt Lake Community College. Every semester, without fail, I ask my students, who here has read the Constitution cover to cover? I used to say within the last 10 years, but nothing would happen. The last 20 years, well, most of them were not born. And I might have one hand go up, and I ask, tell me the context in which you read the Constitution. And the student would say, well, I'm homeschooled. Oh. That explains everything. Well, all right, students, I would ask them, and usually about half of them are from other countries, and I would say, what do you think this Constitution does? You know, before we start on our material, I teach communications and journalism and editing and writing, and I would ask my students, what do you think this Constitution does? And I would get a few ideas. I mean, how would you answer that question? What does the Constitution do? Some people will say, oh, well, it establishes the 3 branches of government. Okay. Is that me? Yeah. KGB's been disbanded, but they still have their ways. Others will say, no, the Constitution doesn't that, it protects our unalienable rights. I think it does that. And others will say, well, I think it's so that we can get health care. How would you answer that? How would you tell a classroom of students what the Constitution does? What's an answer that would work? And I struggled and I tried with these abstract principles. You know what works? The Constitution prevents the rise and establishment of a king. My kids get that. The rise and establishment of a king, because once a king gets in power, you can talk all you want to about branches of government, it means nothing. You can talk all you want to about unalienable rights, it means nothing. It's to prevent a ruler from rising up. That's really the bottom line that my kids understand, and they all go, oh yeah, we don't want a king. I said, right. We don't want a king. All right. So knowing this Constitution, for some of you who are going to pass the citizenship test, you're going to need to know and understand some of these things. So do not take it lightly, because we have an education system where we can learn and teach from each other and grow. But look at North Korea, it's indoctrination. Look at Venezuela, any of you from there, indoctrination. The Soviet Union, indoctrination, rewriting history. No, we have freedom here, freedom of speech, which implies also freedom to listen. So let's get on with our class. And so I would start, a few would catch this flame and go, oh, that's interesting. And we would continue on. Okay, I worked at CIA. When I went there for the first time, I had two questions in my mind, and one was, are there UFOs? The other one was, how good are the satellites? Can they really see my face? Well, I had both of those questions answered. I had a chance to get over to the Library of Congress, Project Blue Book, and went through boxes and boxes of UFO sightings, pages. I don't know, 500,000 pages maybe. I did not go through that many, I just spot checked. And every single one of them was a UFO, which stands for Unidentified Flying Object. We saw a strange light off the clouds, could not identify. We heard strange noises coming off the back of the wing of the plane, which was strange with the jet noise. We didn't know what it was. You know, all these strange things. No flying saucers at all. I was so disappointed. So, okay. They must be hiding it out of Area 50, which is it? And how good are they? Can they see my face? No. The reason is the atmosphere. They cannot penetrate the atmosphere. That's just a physics problem. So high-flying aircraft do the job instead. They can have high-flying aircraft that can indeed read a newspaper or see your face detail, but not from space. So that was another thing I learned about that, which was interesting. Well, partway into my career at CIA, I had an opportunity to go to the Operations Center. That's a 24-hour watch office. Some of you in the military or government, you know about watch offices. They are staffed around the clock in case there's a crisis of some kind. That's what I did at CIA. And after about a couple of years, there was an opening over at the White House to do the same thing. At the White House, the watch office is called the Situation Room. Some of you might have heard of that. It's the most secure room in the White House compound. Not from bombs and not from visual sight. You can see the outside windows, but from electronic bugs on the inside. So you can go in, you can speak privately, you can speak carefully, and you're going to be okay. So there I was for my first week or so at my brand new job. Of course I was going to go work at the White House. I talked to my friends, why don't you apply? And they said, well, it'll interrupt my career at the CIA. I said, you're never going to get a chance to get in the White House. Don't miss the opportunity. Well, I was the only one that went over. Well, okay. And what a great opportunity it was. Now, in the Situation Room, in the center, it's just a small cluster of offices. It's in the West Wing on the ground floor. It's up the stairs, down a hallway, up a couple more stairs, and down over to the Oval Office. The idea was, we were close enough to the president, if there's an emergency, we can race up, and if he's in, and we can tell him. Now, this was during President Reagan, his administration, 1982. And when I actually, it was a couple, 3 years later, 85 when I started at that job. 82 was the CIA. Well, I was in there for about my first week, and suddenly the conference room is going to be used. So President Reagan, he's got a special meeting. Libya did some kind of hijacking. So how does America respond? Well, they're going to meet about it. So the conference room is right there next to our desks. We have little cubicles spread around the outside of the wall, and then there's this wall that separates us from the conference room. And you've seen photos maybe of Reagan around this big oval wooden table. That's the Situation Room. So the secretaries bring in glasses of ice water, and they set it down. They set out pads of paper and some pens. And sitting in the middle of the table is this roving jar of jelly beans. And then here they all come. The great big limos, we can see them through the window. They're all pulling up like giant whales, parking themselves on the beach. And then out step all these famous people, George Shultz and Kath Weinberger, and Bill Casey, the director of CIA, and various military people. And they all file into the West Wing and take their places at the table. And then in comes President Reagan. I thought, wow, look, there he is. And then the door slides closed. Now, here's the interesting part. There's two sliding doors to that conference room, and they have little peepholes on each of them. The reason for the peephole was so we could look through and see where people were seated. If we needed to deliver an emergency message or someone came late and they needed to know which door to go into, they could see. So I found out during those meetings, I could look through those peepholes and watch President Reagan at work. So for the first couple of months, it was fascinating to watch. And here's the great leader of the Western world, if not the world, at the end of the desk, at the end of the table, watching a tennis match. He'd look to the left, and look to the right. Look to the left, and look to the right. I thought, I guess that's what managers do. Well, the press at this time was amplifying this old harangue that Reagan was too old for the job. He was too sleepy, too tired. He was falling asleep in meetings. And I heard that on the news, and I thought, what? So I started to watch through the peephole more focused on his behavior. And I did not see this anxiously engaged, arm-waving, order-delivering man. So I called up my dad. And I got part of my political education. I says, Dad, I think it's true. Reagan is sitting there. He doesn't say much. Everybody else runs the whole thing. And all I see him is look left and right and listen. Once in a while, he'll say something. And my dad said, son, you don't know what you're looking at. This is a master strategist at work. He may not be fighting fire with fire, but he's preparing for them to abandon a bad idea and help him push his agenda forward, because the people thrust upon President Reagan are not of his same mindset when it comes to freedom, and he has to carefully step where he's going. So I went back to the peephole and I watched through that new perspective. And then I could start to see it. Ronald Reagan knew exactly what he was surrounded by against his will. And he was going to do what he could. It was astonishing. Ted Bell from Utah was brought in as the Secretary of Education. Reagan said, dismantle the Department of Education. Get rid of this. And Ted Bell, guess what he did? He doubled it in size and was very proud of that achievement. Reagan was having to wrestle these bureaucracies, and it's not like a king, because he's not. He's a president. He has certain limitations, which some presidents have forgotten. But back in those days, there was a little bit of respect. So over the years, as my coming to freedom moment began to develop and mature into my life, my father was in his latter years, and it was getting difficult for him to do as much public speaking and writing. Some of his final masterpiece works, which some of you have heard of, The 5,000-Year Lead. This is the most recent one. Thank you. This is a new cover. Our friends at the National Center for Constitutional Studies still distribute that. His great masterpiece, which is not as well known, The Making of America. This is my own copy, so it's a little bit beat up. We don't have to use it. An excellent textbook, because it goes through each right that the Constitution protects, and he describes it. You know, this gives us the right to. This provision gives the states the right to appoint their own officers. Okay, so he goes through and does that. So if you don't have this one, National Center for Constitutional Studies also sells this one. Another great book. Part of what got him started, at least nationally known, was The Naked Communist. So that book came out. I don't know how many of you know the story on how that book was named. He originally was going to call it The Real Story of Communism, and the other title in his journals was The Cry of Communism. Now, I don't know what Dad had for dinner when he thought of that name, but that just didn't click with me, The Cry. Real Story of Communism. Now that works pretty good. We all feel better now. Okay. So, Cecil B. DeMille had just completed this movie, The Ten Commandments, and my father was a go-between between Arnold Freeberg up in Utah, who did some of the paintings for the program for that movie, and for Cecil B. DeMille. Dad was the go-between. He had served in California as an FBI agent, working with the Hollywood unions for communist infiltration. So, he took the text of his book and delivered it to Cecil B. DeMille and said, "What do you think?" And a few weeks later, Mr. DeMille sent a letter to my dad. He said, "Cleon, what you've done here is you've taken all the fakery, the facade, the lies, the deceit of communism. You've stripped it so we can really see what it is. I should therefore call it The Naked Communist." And so Dad did it, and that's how that book got its name. So, anyway, the biggest issue that my father shared with all of us in the family, there were 8 children. One of my sisters passed away at age 20. But Dad would share over and over and over the importance of education. He said, "My generation's great task and chore was to research this information so you wouldn't have to. The task of this generation is to learn how to teach the material." And I remember hearing that, and I thought, well, okay, teach it, so. How many in here know how to teach a millennial anything, including which side of the road to drive on? Okay. So we have our work cut out for us. There are thousands, tens of thousands, of wonderful books on the Constitution that declare and describe and tell us what those principles are. They tell the history and the context and the references that the founders turned to. John Locke, Cicero, you've heard all these names probably as you look around. Ancient philosophers that came up with brilliant, inspired ideas. The Bible, yeah. A chunk out of the Bible, the Old Testament, Moses being faced with who knows how many hundreds of thousands of Israelites out in the desert, and they're all clamoring for fairness. He stole my donkey, and she stole the cheese that I had been saving. We want justice, Moses. And so poor Moses, he's sitting there, all these complainers are coming by, and finally, father-in-law, Jethro, he says, "Moses, you're going to burn yourself out, son. You need to do this a better way. Let me teach you how to organize." So they did, into families of 10s, families of 50s, hundreds, thousands, as large as they needed. Each one had a representative, and those representatives would be a judge and meet with other judges, and they would raise the problem as high if they couldn't resolve it until it landed on Moses' gopher wood desk. And then he would handle it. So it didn't happen very often. So that principle, those kinds of principles of republicanism, representative government, those are ancient. And the founders turned to that to help us out. So the great message of my father to us was, we need to educate ourselves. We need to find out a better way to do it. These last couple of years, as I go through my father's works trying to help him finish up, I noticed a great vacuum in his labors. This vacuum was a starting place. Now, it's great to see the 28 principles of freedom that he mentions here in the 5,000-year league. That's great if you appreciate the principles of freedom and the Constitution to start with. That's great. 285, 286 rights that are explained in this book. That's great if you're already into the Constitution. And suddenly, I thought of my students. They don't want to pick up that document. Why should they? What's the relevancy? Where do we begin? What's the starting place? So I started to do a little research. Every single national poll, people can identify certain things that they say are in the Constitution. Most of them are in the Bill of Rights. They don't know it because we've stopped reading the Constitution. So our new movement needs to be just read it. Make bumper stickers, write it on the steamy bathroom mirror, send it in your letters. Just read it. That's what we need to do. Just read it. And then we can engage in the debates and the discussion. We can take part. These things suddenly have a place in our lives. So, here we go. How to read the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Made easier. This is the starting place. This is the latest effort to come out of Dad's basement treasure trove of work. So, it's been rough, but I started out with what I thought was just the absolute most basic things. Here we go. I know you can't read this, but I'll tell you anyway. Why read the Constitution? Why? That's what my students want to know. Skousen, why are you bothering me with this? Well, I answer right there on a page and a half. And the very last line, because you in here know that, we read the Constitution, therefore, to stay free. That's why. To stay free. If we stop reading it, we will lose our freedom. And all the mess in our country today is evidence of that happening right now. Okay, here's the next question. What does it do? How do you answer that? What does the Constitution do? Okay, well, we handle that in just 3 or 4 pages. Why did they write it? Really? You mean there's answers to those questions? Yeah, and they're in this book right here. Why did they write it? See, it's just part of the page, that's all. We don't need to get into too much theory. That's what's losing the people we need to draw to this resurrection of our Constitution. Simplicity. The rest will come later. Okay, now, so here we go. The Declaration of Independence. That's where we start. Poor Thomas Jefferson, he was sweating over this assignment he was given. He was told, okay, we want you to write this declaration for us. He had 17 days to do it. It was easy to list all the reasons we wanted to leave England. That was the easy part. The hard part was to encapsulate and embody those eternal principles of freedom that were being violated. So, there's 8 ancient principles, and I identify those here at the beginning. And then guess what? Guess what? The Declaration of Independence, it has structure. What? See, it says so right here in the book. Structure, content, really. And so you look at that. It has 5 parts. Did you know that? Yeah, the Declaration has 5 parts. And if you look at them, suddenly, oh, it's not so bad. It's got a preamble. And then, let's see, that starts out, when in the course of human events. Oh, I've heard that before. Wait a minute, here's another part. Part 2, the assertion of rights. We hold these truths to be self-evident. And then he outlines those 8 ancient principles. And then the third part, the charges against the king. What did the king do? Well, there's 27 things that they list. And on our website, we're going to have that list of 27 correlated to the Constitution. Every charge brought against King George III is answered with a restriction, a permission, a control, a prohibition in the Constitution. So I thought, well, if King George had not been such a bad guy, maybe our Constitution would not be so thorough. There is opposition in all things. So thank you for helping us get a good Constitution. Okay, here's part 4. Part 4 is the defenses. The colonists wanted to tell the world, this is what we did. There's 2 paragraphs where they defend their actions. We did these things and we were ignored, rebuffed, spit on, captured, arrested, killed, but we tried. And the 5th part is the actual declaration. The last paragraph where they separate themselves from the king and say, we hereby stand on our own feet as a nation in the world, and to that we pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. All right. So, after you do that, then you come to this next section. It's called timed reading. What? You mean you can read this thing now? Yeah, read it. And guess how long it takes? 15 minutes if you're a slow reader. So if you could have been at my house on July 4th, you would have seen half of my grandkids, 15 of them, 11 years and younger, some in diapers, and there were some newborns. But they all lined up to help Grandpa. And we went through and we read the Declaration line by line, and each of those kids read a sentence out of it. After 20 minutes, that whole little group and their parents, we had all read the Declaration of Independence for the first time in the lives of many of them. That's going to become our new July 4th tradition. And they were anxious to participate, which actually shocked me. Who wants to read? Well, they were so happy, and they would hit words like events and despotism and tyranny. It was so hard for those little kids, but we got through it, and they were able to do it. Okay, after you do that, then there's a little section that says test yourself. So you've read it, now go through and test yourselves. How well do you know it? When was it signed? Let me look it up. So I have you go through with a pencil and number all the complaints, 1 through 27, and then ask a question. So like on number 23, the king is accused of refusing to defend the colonies and starting blank. So you go back and say, what's it? 23. I thought I just read that. Let me look at that. You look up number 23 and you find it. And you write it in there. Okay. So this makes understanding, not just reading. You start to understand. You go, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know all that. That's pretty good stuff. Okay. All right. Then we move on to the Constitution. Now, what do I need to know to read the Constitution? What do I need to know? Old English. Now, guess what? When you come across an Old English word, this book is pretty snazzy. It has in the back a glossary, and you can look up those terms, and you can see what they mean in the context of the Constitution. There they are, right there. So when you hit these Old English words, you go, what does that mean? Look it up. It's right in this book. It's all there, okay? All right. But basically the answer is you don't need to know much of anything except to just read it, just read it, just read it. Just read it. Never mind what Bernie Sanders says or Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. Never mind all these Santa Claus promises. We can listen to our candidates for office for truth, light, and understanding. Everybody else wants to be the Santa Claus. Can they do it? No, they can't. All right. I mentioned in here briefly that there's 3 constitutions our country has lived under. The first one was the Articles of Confederation. They were too weak, they didn't work. We finally sat down, dumped those, and wrote the Constitution that built this nation essentially to the greatest nation in the world. That was abandoned in the early part of the 1900s. 1913, 1930, 1933, all the New Deal things, the Federal Reserve, the 16th and 17th Amendments, the leftovers from some 1800 issues, from the Civil War, President Lincoln, all these problems with our Constitution started to affect us. And so I call the third version of the Constitution, 1913 to today, not working very well. We are going backwards. So you cannot be ignorant and free. So let's get in and take a tour of the Constitution. Are you ready? Guess what? It has structure. Look, see, here's a picture of the actual Constitution. And there's arrows pointing. This points to an article. What's that? Well, we have chapters, paragraphs, and sentences in a book. The Constitution has articles, pages, has articles, sections, and clauses. Same kind of organization. It's not that different. And you can tell the sections are numbered. See, there's an arrow pointing. Section 2, there's an arrow pointing. This is a clause. Up here, an arrow. This is the preamble. Anybody learned anything new yet so far? So, this is how we try it. After we do that, I go into the content. How are these things organized? Really short. We don't need to belabor it. We don't need to show the violations. We just want to get them to read it. All right. Now, 7 articles. I give a little memory trick in here. How you can remember these. Now, could any of you in here recite 7 articles in their correct order with a one-word definition of what each article is? Probably be pretty good. This is how I present it to my kids, my students, when we get this chance. Do you remember the names of the Star Wars characters? Remember Princess Leia? Remember Chewbacca? R2-D2, C-3PO? Who are all these people? Princess Leia, Jar Jar Binks, Ledge Sasser. What? Haven't heard of Ledge Sasser. That must have been one of those episodes I didn't watch. No, Ledge Sasser is who I made up. So you can remember Ledge, L-E-J, legislative, executive, judicial. Articles 1, 2, and 3. Sasser, his last name. S-A-S-R. States, amendments, supremacy, ratification. Articles 4, 5, 6, and 7. So you can put that in your head. Ledge Sasser, Ledge Sasser, Ledge Sasser, Ledge Sasser. Can Bernie Sanders really give all of us free college tuition? Can he really? I wonder what his job description is. Let's see, that would be the executive. Let's see, Ledge Sasser, legislative executive. That would be the second article. It works! And my kids go, wow, that's fantastic. So, such is the nature of education, as some of you know. We give memory tricks in there, and then another timed reading. Read the 7 articles, not the amendments, just the 7 articles. That's all you got to do. And then a little test. Go through and do the same with the Bill of Rights. And we come all the way through each article individually. And towards the back here, top 10 popular myths that I just wanted to mention at the end here. I know that a lot is going around about the Constitution and some blatant lies and problems that we're all hearing. So I tried to capture the top 10. I'm sure there's others, and this can be revised as time goes on. But the top 10 myths I put in, the first one was the Constitution is old-fashioned. How do you answer that? You know, and the second myth goes right along with it. It's a living document. It must change with the times. How do you answer that one? Here's how you answer it. principles of unalienable human rights, those rights themselves, those are eternal. Those are there before there was any written Constitution. Those were there before the Constitution came. They've always been there, endowed by our Creator. We've all had these rights. So no document gives us those. We've already had those. And because those are eternal, the job of the Constitution is to legally protect them from being interrupted and intruded upon by the government. That's the answer. They have nothing to do with technological advances. They have nothing to do with economics, with society, with world affairs. They have nothing to do with those. Those are eternal and separate, and they stand aside from all the gyrations and tides of a rise and fall of public opinion and pursuits and denigration of society. Those rights stand separately connected. So when people say it's old-fashioned, what they're really saying is some of our unalienable rights are now disposable. So my question to others is, when they say it's old-fashioned, I say, well, which part? Gun rights. Too much violence. The Electoral College. And that's usually about where it ends. What else? Oh, just the whole structure. They can't make amendments fast enough. That's too cumbersome. That's wrong. The president should be able to change it. And I said, what? Why do you want to give the president that power when the Supreme Court has already taken that power? So that argument always ends and fizzles there. But once you look at it in terms of protecting our rights, then you know you're okay. All right, so we go to the back here, and I added something that I haven't seen with other copies. Perhaps you have, I haven't. But in the outside column are these numbers. And these numbers are line numbers, every 5 lines. And what that allows a teacher to do is say, students, let's read about an interesting comment that Thomas Jefferson put in the Declaration about evils being sufferable. Let's read that. Turn to page 130, and it starts on line 5. And the kids all turn to the book, and there it is, line 5. Let's see. Mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms. In other words, people will put up with a lot of junk and garbage as long as they still can kind of get their Netflix and buy groceries and go to the ball game and all of that. So that's the purpose of that. So here, towards the end, we have the glossary and then the answer in the very back. Answers to all the little test questions that I provided. And this particular copy, I had all the grandkids sign their names so that this is a little memento. July 4th, 2016. This is what we did at our house. Okay. My father's in law school, 1933, and he's going to a constitutional law class, and he asks the professor after a couple of weeks, when are we going to start studying the Constitution? And the professor says, well, we don't study the Constitution per se, we just talk about what the Supreme Court's done with the Constitution. And Dad said, well, where can I read about this, about the Constitution and constitutional law? And the professor says, well, we don't cover that here at George Washington University. Well, is there a book I can read? I don't think so. I don't know the book, but why? I said, well, I want to know how constitutional law has rested upon and used the Constitution. What's wrong with that question? Well, at the time, there was no book. So it was in those early years that Dad decided he needed to write it. And so those are the books that he's brought forward today. There's a number of others which I hope to help him finish and will be wrapped up with his great labors to us and everyone else. So often when he would give his talks, he had a way he would close out those talks. And I'm going to go ahead and wrap up here right now. He was speaking at a church. And as you know, in the Bible, we have Revelations and lots of the prophets, lots of prophecy about the last days, and Revelations and prophecies about Jesus in the New Testament. Well, Dad has told his audience, I often get asked by people who come up to me, they say, Dr. Skousen, our world's in a mess. We've got all these problems. Look around. We've got killings and acts of terrorism and all these destructions. The place is falling apart. It's a terrible, dark time. Why don't you get discouraged? And my father would say, well, you're right. These are dark times. It is testing each of us to do our best. It's been difficult. A lot of people have given up. They're discouraged. They've retired. They're golfing. He said, picking up the Bible, he said, I'll tell you, I don't get discouraged. I'll tell you why. I've read the book, and in the end, we win. So just read it. Thank you. I think I've run out of time. I'm all done. Thank you.